Tomorrow there will come into operation the most comprehensive system of social security ever introduced into any country. We may be proud that Britain, which has given the lead in so many things to the world, is still in the forefront of social advance. In the building up of the great structure of our social services, all parties in the state have borne their part. I am therefore not speaking to you in any controversial spirit, but I consider it right that as Prime Minister I should tonight say something of what this means to every one of you and to the nation. First, a word as to the past. I remember that when I first went to work in East London, apart from what was done by voluntary organizations and by private charity, and apart from the obligations imposed on employers in respect of industrial injury, the only provision for the citizen who through sickness, old age, or unemployment was in need of assistance was that given by the Poor Law. The Poor Law was still based on the principle of deterrence, the principle that the necessitous were in a sense offenders against society. It was assumed that the individual could and should make provision against every contingency. The Poor Law was designed to be, and indeed it was, the last refuge of the destitute. The younger generations can hardly realize what that meant. Since those days, successive governments have introduced a whole series of remedies for particular aspects of social insecurity. First came old age pensions and the beginning of school meals. Then the Lloyd George Insurance Act, with its provision against sickness and unemployment. In later years there came extensions of those schemes, widows' pensions, and other reforms. The new principle behind these advances in the social services was that we must combine together to meet contingencies with which we cannot cope as individual citizens. Valuable as these schemes were, they were not comprehensive. They were not always consistent with each other and gave rise to anomalies. A plan to bring them into harmony was needed. The wartime government of all parties, led by Mr. Churchill, declared in the Atlantic Charter that one of the causes for which we were fighting was social security. Accordingly, Mr. Arthur Greenwood, who was in charge of reconstruction, set up a committee under Sir William, now Lord Beveridge, to produce a comprehensive plan. His plan was considered and worked upon by the coalition government, and its broad outlines received the support of all parties in the government and in Parliament. In the lifetime of the old Parliament, the Education Act and the Widows' Pensions Act were passed into law. The present government put them into effect and took up the task of making the plan as a whole a practical reality. In less than 3 years, the necessary legislation has been passed, and tomorrow it comes into operation. There has, of course, been disagreement over details, and the government take full responsibility for the scheme as it has emerged from discussion. But it is, I think, fair to say that a new scheme comes into operation with the approval of the nation. The 4 acts which come into force tomorrow, national insurance, industrial injuries, national assistance, and national health service, represent the main body of the army of social security. Advanced parties, so to speak, such as increases in old age pensions and extensions of unemployment benefit, have led the way. I will make 1 or 2 general points before I deal with the schemes themselves. Firstly, these 4 schemes are part of a general plan, and they fit in with each other. Secondly, they are not designed to meet the needs of a particular section of the community. They are comprehensive and available to every citizen. They give security to all the members of the family. Thirdly, a word about the method of payment. National assistance, like family allowances, will be paid for entirely by the Exchequer. That is to say, you do not pay for them directly, but through the taxes to which we all contribute. The National Health Service will be paid for mainly by the Exchequer. The other services are insurance services, paid for by direct contributions from those who are insured and from their employers, if they are employed, with assistance from the state out of general taxation. You pay your contribution towards the benefits to which you and your family are entitled by sticking a single stamp on a card each week. This is a great simplification. You will have to contribute more than you've been doing up to now, but you will get a far greater range of benefits, for some of which you've been paying hitherto separately through insurance companies and friendly societies, or to private hospitals and practitioners. Therefore you must consider not only what you now have to pay, but what you get and what you save. But I must not leave this question of payment without emphasizing one vital point. All our social services have to be paid for, in one way or another, from what is produced by the people of this country. We cannot create a scheme which gives the nation as a whole more than they put into it, and is always the general level of production that settles our standard of material well-being. Only higher output can give us more of the things we all need. This will decide the real value of the money payments. Remember that the scheme as a whole is designed to cover you and your family throughout your life. If you are unemployed or ill, if you are widowed, or having a baby, or retired, or the guardian of an orphan, you are entitled to receive help under the National Insurance Act. And if you die, there will be help for those left behind you. If you're injured, or if you die as a result of your employment, there will not now be any need for costly litigation under the Employers' Liability and Workmen's Compensation Acts. Payments will be made under the Industrial Injuries Act. Hitherto, our social legislation has been piecemeal, and there's often been a sense of injustice, where two people whose circumstances have been much the same have had unequal treatment because they came under different schemes. It is difficult to avoid all anomalies, but we have tried to get much more consistency. For instance, the standard rates of sickness, unemployment, and retiring pensions will all be the same. This is right, because after all, the payment should depend on what you need and not on why you need it. There's one new feature which I should mention specially, the retiring pension. The country needs the help of all who can work, and many old people are still giving good service. The idea is that you should get a pension when you have to retire, and not simply when you reach a certain age. This is meant to help people fit for work to keep on as long as they can. Unemployment and sickness benefit will still be payable for 5 years after you reach the retiring age, and if you go on working, you'll qualify for a higher pension. I hope all of you who are nearing the age of retirement will think about this carefully. One word on administration. National insurance is a service dealing with human beings who need sympathy and personal consideration. The aim of the new service is to give this through a network of local offices, staffed by men and women who will give friendly guidance and help and information to everyone. There are bound to be early difficulties with staff, accommodation, and so forth. In a great plan like this, there must be some rough edges, but these will be overcome in time with patience and goodwill. Let me turn to the National Assistance Act. This act abolishes the last remnant of the old poor law. National insurance is designed to cover most risks, but it is a principle of the scheme that benefits are related to contributions. Especially in the early days of the scheme, there will be people who have not contributed for long enough to qualify. There will also be chronic invalids, some old people, others like these, for whom additional provision is needed. Any of you whose means, whether from insurance or other sources, fall short of your needs on a standard approved by Parliament, will be able to receive the necessary help from the National Assistance Board. You will be able to draw your money from the post office or the employment exchange if you are unemployed, in just the same way as pensions or insurance benefit are drawn. The old system of outdoor relief and poor law institutions has been abolished. Now I turn to the National Health Service. We are seeking here not merely to provide services for those who are sick, but to make a healthy nation. The aim is to ensure that the provision of proper care and treatment shall not depend on financial resources, and that when you are sick, you will be free from the money worries which so often accompany illness. The scheme gives a complete cover for health by pooling the nation's resources and paying the bill collectively. It's not dependent on insurance. Everyone is eligible. It covers all kinds of care: doctor, dentist, midwife, health visitor, oculist and optician, and surgeon. It provides for treatment in hospitals and sanatoria, and for the services of specialists of all kinds. Help in the home when people are sick will be given wherever possible. Spectacles, dentures, appliances, and artificial limbs will be available. But a word of caution is necessary. It will take time to develop. We shall have to start with what we have, and then work up to a full service when our present shortages have been overtaken. You all know that owing to the war, there are great arrears to be made up in the provision of hospitals and in the reinforcement of medical and nursing staffs. We shall have to be a bit lenient with the service at first. I do not think that I need go into the question of the relationship between doctor and patient under the new scheme, as it's been so fully discussed, or into the question of the basis of payment, which has now been accepted. The remuneration of those taking part has been based on the principle that all of them, doctors, dentists and nurses alike, can earn full professional incomes on lines worked out by independent committees. Our hospital system, which has grown up in a haphazard way, partly through voluntary efforts and partly through municipal provision, will from tomorrow become one great service. With few exceptions, all hospitals will pass into the country's ownership. But they'll not be run from Whitehall, but by voluntary local bodies. There'll be just as much need of personal interest and individuality as before. Before I close, I should like to say a word of appreciation to all of you who've served in the past, whether as officers of approved societies, including friendly societies, trade unions and insurance companies, or as members of local authorities, insurance committees, hospital savings committees, or voluntary organizations. You have, as so often happens in this country, blazed the trail. I would like you to look on this new social security plan not as the ending of your work, as its fulfillment. You have been working in the cause of social security and of health. The institutions with which you've been connected were not ends in themselves, but the means to an end. Some of these institutions will take on a new lease of life. Others will lose their identity, but the value of your work remains. The new structure is built on foundations which you have laid. And I hope that you will still find a field for your generous impulses and public spirit. Here then is our new scheme of social security for all. I believe that it will increase the health and happiness of our people, and I ask you all to join in working it wholeheartedly, so it may bring new strength and well-being to our country. Good night.